Have you ever imagined that on an ordinary night, your entire life could change forever? Have you ever thought that someone you don't even know might carry within them the key to a truth buried for years? Amidst the vibrant lights of Chicago, where wealth and misery walk side by side, a silent scene unfolds, and no one even notices the fate being woven there. If you're a crybaby like me, you already know. Grab a tissue. Because this story isn't just touching, it's one of those that truly makes us reflect and feel deeply. It was a cold night. The sky, covered in heavy clouds, reflected the city's golden lights like a shattered mirror. Outside the most expensive and luxurious restaurant in town, a small pair of eyes were shining not with joy, but with hunger, sadness, and hope. Luna Carter, a little girl just 7 years old, was there, hugging herself tightly to try to shield her body from the biting wind sweeping through the streets. She gazed inside the restaurant, watching the smiles, the abundant plates of food, the warm atmosphere, while her tiny feet, wearing sandals worn out by time, trembled against the frozen sidewalk. Beside her, an elderly woman with a frail appearance was also battling the cold. Helen Foster, her temporary guardian, held a small package of stale bread in her hands, the only food they had managed to get that day. While the world inside seemed like an unattainable dream, their world was a nightmare repeating itself day after day. But on that same night, inside the restaurant, Alexander Whitmore, one of the most powerful and wealthy men in the country, was celebrating yet another billion-dollar achievement. Surrounded by businessmen and influencers, he was exactly where he had always wanted to be, at the top. Dressed in an impeccable suit, he raised his glass in another toast, immersed in luxury, power, and flattery. But when he turned his gaze towards the window, his eyes landed on something that froze his heart. That child, that little girl. There was something about her that Alexander couldn't explain. He stood still, his glass suspended in midair, staring into those big, sorrowful eyes. A chill ran down his spine, and he felt a tightness in his chest that made no sense. He didn't know her, or did he? His heart began beating in a strange way, as if a forgotten memory was trying to break through the barriers of time. A flash crossed his mind, a distant memory, a feminine smile, a face he hadn't seen in years. Isabella Montgomery, a name he had buried in the past, along with a story he chose never to revisit. Isabella was different from any other woman, the only one who could make his world tremble, and the only one he let slip away because he chose business and ambition over love. Alexander Whitmore was a man used to dominating everything, controlling situations, winning under any circumstances. But for the first time in many years, he felt weak. Something about that child stirred him deeply, awakening a feeling he didn't even know still existed. As the party carried on and laughter echoed around him, Alexander couldn't take his eyes off that little girl. He stood up, walked towards the window, and saw Luna curling up in Helen's lap, trying to find some shelter in the little warmth the woman could offer. And then, a question echoed in his mind, overwhelming and unstoppable. Who was that child? And why, deep in his soul, did he feel as if there was a connection between them? That night, Alexander didn't know yet, but he was facing the greatest secret of his life. A secret that would change not only his own destiny, but also the destiny of that defenseless little girl forgotten by the world. This isn't just a story about wealth or power. This is a story about hidden secrets, forgotten blood ties, and the transformative force of love that insists on being reborn, even after years of darkness. Luna Carter was a child marked by absence, silence, and hunger. At only 7 years old, she had already faced pains that many adults could never imagine enduring. Her delicate appearance hid the strength life had forced her to build. Her blonde hair fell in messy waves over her fragile shoulders, and her large, almond-shaped eyes had a peculiar shine, a mix of innocence and resilience. Despite her worn-out clothes and old shoes that barely protected her feet from the cold, there was a simple, almost magical beauty about her, as if life had reserved something far greater than she could ever imagine. Helen Foster, on the other hand, was the portrait of silent struggle. At 58, her health was already showing signs of weakness. Her gray hair, always tied up in a simple bun, revealed years of hard work and sleepless nights. A widow with no children, she had become Luna's guardian when the girl was placed under social care after the death of her biological mother. Helen never knew many details about Luna's past, but from the very first moment, she felt an unexplainable connection with the child. With every glance, every tired smile, Helen saw in Luna a reflection of herself, a life that never had the chance to truly bloom. They lived in a decaying neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, in a small rented apartment that barely protected them from the rain and cold. They survived on what little they could gather through donations, occasional jobs, and a lot of sacrifice. Even so, Helen made a point to keep Luna's dignity intact, teaching her to dream, to read, to believe that there was a world beyond dirty streets and empty shelves. On the other side of the city, at the very top of the corporate food chain, was Alexander Whitmore. At only 39, Alexander was considered a business prodigy. Owner of one of the largest investment holdings in America, his fortune was featured on the covers of the most prestigious magazines. Tall, imposing, with a piercing gaze and a calculated smile, Alexander was the kind of man who never accepted defeat. From a young age, he had trained himself not to get attached, not to get distracted, never to show weakness. Life taught him that feelings were obstacles for anyone who wanted to reach the top. Alexander was born into a traditional Chicago family, surrounded by privilege and responsibilities. He lost his mother as a teenager and, from then on, was molded to become a cold, strategic leader. He never married, never built a family. His relationships were fleeting, fed by glamour, and ended by the suffocating routine of business. To the world, he was ruthless, a man who closed companies without hesitation, who turned losses into profits, and who never gave in to the whims of the heart. Behind this faucet of power, there was someone who walked silently in his shadow, Clarissa Holden, his personal assistant for over 15 years. Clarissa was much more than an employee. Always present, always discreet, she was the fundamental piece that kept everything in Alexander's life running smoothly. But Clarissa had her own secrets. With a calculating gaze and impeccable posture, she had learned to manipulate situations to her advantage, erasing traces, controlling information, and deciding behind the scenes who could enter or leave the billionaire's life. Clarissa had built her own web of power beside Alexander. She knew everything, every vulnerability, and used that to secure her unshakable position. Over the years, she had driven away anyone who posed a threat to the control she held over him. And among those people was a woman whose name could no longer be spoken, Isabella Montgomery. While Luna walked barefoot on the icy sidewalks, while Helen counted coins for their next piece of bread, and while Alexander toasted his newest business acquisition, fate was silently preparing the greatest shock of their lives. They were strangers. Completely opposite lives, separated by abysses of class, power, and secrets. But they were about to discover that blood runs stronger than any obstacle, and no lie stays buried forever. That cold night in Chicago seemed ordinary to many, but for Alexander Whitmore, it would be the beginning of a twist he could never have predicted. The restaurant was known for its exclusivity, fully booked reservations, and impeccable service. Dinner went on as usual, toasts, discreet negotiations, promises of future million-dollar deals. However, amid the elegant clinking of silverware and forced laughter, Alexander felt a different kind of restlessness. His eyes, so used to analyzing charts, contracts, and endless meetings, were captured by something simple and extremely powerful. On the other side of the glass window, between the first falling snowflakes, was Luna, sitting on the frozen sidewalk, hugging herself. She watched with wide, curious eyes everything happening inside the restaurant. The contrast was stark. Inside, luxury and abundance. Outside, abandonment and need. Alexander couldn't look away. No matter how hard he tried to focus on the conversations around him, his attention was drawn back to that melancholic little girl. There was something unexplainable about her. It wasn't pity, nor generic compassion. It was a deep sensation, an unease that made his heart race, a feeling of connection he couldn't rationalize. He found himself observing every detail, the way she brushed her hair back, how she held tightly onto an old torn doll as if it were her greatest treasure. It was as if every feature of that child awakened memories Alexander didn't even know he carried. At one point, Helen Foster tried to pull Luna away from the window. She knew those people had neither the time nor the disposition to look at them. She knew the last thing the rich wanted was to be confronted by misery. But Luna resisted. Something kept her there, staring intently at that man in the suit, who from the inside seemed so distant and, at the same time, so familiar. Without realizing it, Alexander stood up from the table. His partners exchanged confused glances at his sudden movement. He walked slowly towards the window, trying to get a better look at the little girl who seemed to hold his soul captive. When his eyes met Luna's, it was like a shock. A forgotten memory exploded in his mind. A smile, a face, a woman. Isabella. The name echoed in his memory with force. It was impossible. Or maybe it wasn't. He couldn't explain it, but his feet moved on instinct. Without thinking, he left the restaurant. The cold air hit his face, but it didn't stop his urge to get closer. He crossed the street quickly, with firm steps, as Helen stood up, startled, trying to protect Luna, fearing they might be in danger. Alexander stopped a few steps away from them. Helen looked up with suspicion, used to seeing only looks of disdain or indifference. But what she saw in that man's eyes was different. Alexander looked at Luna closely, saw her face under the yellow glow of the streetlight. There was something in her features, in the shape of her eyes, in the way her small smile appeared. It was like seeing a shadow from the past, something he couldn't ignore. He knelt down, a mix of caution and fascination, and Luna, curious, didn't back away. She looked directly at the unknown man, without fear, only with a strange sense of recognition. For the first time in a very long time, Alexander didn't know what to say. He, a man used to dominating negotiations, to controlling every word, found himself completely speechless before a simple child. The silence was broken by Helen, who quickly thanked him and pulled Luna away, trying to protect her from any possible trouble. But Alexander couldn't ignore the impact of that brief encounter. His eyes followed them as they walked away, his heart still racing, and a single question formed in his mind. Why does this child affect me so deeply? Alexander Whitmore couldn't sleep that night. The image of that child stayed alive in his mind, invading his thoughts like a puzzle that needed to be solved. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't focused on business, investments, or numbers. Something much deeper had been awakened. The next day, while the city continued its fast-paced rhythm, Alexander was already in his office before sunrise. He was not a man to ignore his instincts, and that feeling told him there was a hidden story behind that little girl's eyes. In the silence of dawn, Alexander began digging through old records. It wasn't hard to find information about people who frequented the areas near the restaurant, but Helen Foster and Luna Carter were practically ghosts in the system. Alexander activated his private security team, ordering a discreet investigation. He wanted everything: names, history, origins. It was unusual for him, a man used to erasing the past, to feel a desperate need to unearth it. But something compelled him to keep going. As hours passed, fragmented information began to emerge. Helen Foster was known to social services, had been a caretaker for several orphan children, and was now the temporary guardian of a little girl left in the system after her mother's death. Nothing in the records was detailed, just the basics: mother deceased at childbirth, father unknown, precarious financial situation. But Alexander couldn't stop digging. He needed to know who the child's mother was. He then ordered a deeper search into hospital records. Through powerful contacts, he accessed protected files, documents long forgotten in neglected public departments. And then, among those old papers, the name appeared before his eyes: Isabella Montgomery. The shock was immediate. The name he had tried to forget, the name he had locked away in the deepest drawers of his memory, now resurfaced, connected to a child who seemed to echo every trace of his past. Alexander remembered Isabella with a mixture of nostalgia and guilt. She had been more than a passion, more than a fleeting affair in his youth. Isabella had been someone who challenged his convictions, a woman full of life and dreams, with an artistic sensitivity that clashed with the corporate world he knew. Alexander closed his eyes, trying to recall his last moments with Isabella. He remembered the final time he saw her, the argument about priorities, the impulsive breakup driven by the blind ambition that consumed him. He remembered her trying to tell him something, a final letter he never read, a last phone call he refused to answer. And now, years later, her name reappeared alongside the face of a child who carried his features. The unease gave way to a fierce determination. He needed to confirm the truth. He ordered all of Isabella's medical records, information about the birth, about her death. But to his surprise, the records were incomplete. Some documents were missing. Information had been erased. This was no ordinary error, it was deliberate. Someone had manipulated the past. Alexander pressed his team further, ordering access to hospital employee data from that time, any clue to reconstruct the story. As the investigation deepened, small notes appeared, hidden administrative records, evidence that Isabella had tried to leave messages, tried to warn him before she died. Each new piece of information pulled Alexander deeper into the pain of his own negligence. Every clue led him to believe that little Luna Carter was not just another abandoned child. She was part of him. She was the product of a past he had been kept from knowing. The first doubts transformed into disturbing certainties. He knew he was close to uncovering the truth, but also sensed that someone had worked hard to keep that secret buried. With each recovered file, with each new piece of information, Alexander realized this was no system error. Someone had chosen to erase this story, and he was determined to uncover it all, no matter the cost. Alexander Whitmore now stood before a truth that had been stolen from him for years. But each new discovery made the weight of the past more unbearable. With the help of his security team and the best private investigators in the city, he rebuilt the hidden path someone had tried so carefully to erase. And what he found was dirtier than he could ever have imagined. Clarissa Holden's name began to appear in hospital records, in hidden emails, in administrative documents. She was there, a key player in everything that had happened after Isabella Montgomery's death. He revisited forgotten memories, remembered Clarissa insisting he continue his trips when Isabella tried to reach him, recalled how her letters were discarded, how her calls were filtered, always with the excuse of protecting him from unnecessary distractions. And now, everything made sense. Clarissa wasn't just organizing his corporate life. She had been orchestrating his personal life in the shadows, making decisions that changed the course of his existence without him even realizing it. When Alexander confronted his legal team, demanding access to the company's confidential records from those years, there were no more doubts. Clarissa had intercepted Isabella's final letter, coerced hospital staff to keep Luna's birth a secret, and ensured that Alexander would never know of his own daughter's existence. The final confirmation came through a DNA test. Alexander wanted no room for doubt or manipulation. He discreetly summoned Helen and Luna for testing, claiming it was a standard procedure for financial aid release. Helen, cautious yet hopeful, agreed. A few days later, the results landed like a lightning bolt into Alexander's heart. The truth was clear, indisputable. Luna Carter was his biological daughter. The same blood, coursing through one of the most powerful men in the country, ran through the veins of the small girl forgotten by the streets of Chicago. The impact of this discovery was devastating. Alexander, a man accustomed to controlling everything, dictating the terms of every negotiation, now faced his cruelest failure, allowing his daughter to grow up in inhumane conditions without ever knowing she existed. The guilt suffocated him, but stronger than guilt was an urgent need for justice, for redemption. Luna deserved far more than the precarious life she knew, and Clarissa would pay for her vile role in stealing that right from her. The tension reached its peak when Alexander prepared for the final confrontation. Clarissa was called to his office, as if for any normal meeting. She entered confidently, elegant as always, but this time, she was met with Alexander's cold, merciless gaze, not the gaze of a calculating businessman, but of a betrayed father. He threw the documents across the desk, the tests, the altered records, the intercepted emails, the financial transfers showing illegal payments to silence hospital staff. Clarissa tried to maintain her composure, tried to argue, feigning ignorance. But Alexander gave her no space for lies. The confrontation was direct and brutal. He demanded answers, and faced with irrefutable evidence, Clarissa finally broke. She tried to justify her actions with excuses of protection, of corporate interests, saying Isabella could have been an obstacle to the company's growth, that a child would have distracted him from his path to success. But every word from her lips was poison to Alexander. He saw the scale of the damage done, realizing that his thirst for power had been manipulated to destroy any chance of living something pure and true. He hadn't just been deceived, he had become an indirect accomplice in an unimaginable injustice. The climax of the truth was right before him. There was no turning back. Alexander knew what needed to be done. Clarissa had condemned Luna to misery and him to emptiness. Now, it was time to correct the past, to face the consequences with courage and responsibility. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would go unpunished. Alexander Whitmore was never known for his mercy. Throughout his entire career, he built an unbreakable reputation for ruthlessness. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the fury now raging within his chest. Clarissa's betrayal was not just personal, it was a crime against his daughter, against his story, against everything he lost without even having the chance to fight for it. And he would never allow that to be treated in silence. The day after their confrontation, Alexander acted with surgical precision. He called an extraordinary board meeting, demanding Clarissa's presence. The main conference room, usually the stage for billion-dollar decisions, was now set for the downfall of the woman who for years had manipulated everything and everyone under the disguise of loyalty and efficiency. The room was full. Directors and shareholders sat, curious, expecting strategic announcements, but never prepared for the spectacle about to unfold. Clarissa entered, as she always did, with her head held high and her makeup flawless, trying to maintain an air of control. But when she saw Alexander's cold, unyielding stare, a chill ran down her spine. She knew he wasn't the type of man to forgive mistakes, much less betrayals of this magnitude. Alexander began his presentation in a formal tone, going over company numbers, financial movements, until suddenly, the screens in the auditorium changed. Confidential files started to appear, intercepted messages, recorded phone calls, undeniable proof that Clarissa had manipulated hospital records, coerced employees, and deliberately hidden Luna's existence for years. With each piece of evidence shown, the silence in the room grew heavier. The faces of the executives shifted from shock to outrage. It was impossible to deny what they saw before their eyes. Clarissa had crossed every acceptable boundary, destroying not only Alexander's trust, but also damaging the integrity of the company itself, jeopardizing its image, and risking its legacy. Alexander stood firm, his voice echoing with authority and disdain. He spared no words, exposing in detail the cruelty committed, the calculated manipulation, and finally, he announced the inevitable conclusion. Clarissa Holden was officially stripped of her position, banned from the company, with no rights to benefits, shares, or any form of compensation. More than just a dismissal, Alexander immediately instructed his lawyers to file both criminal and civil lawsuits against her. Clarissa would not walk away unscathed. She would face justice and answer for the years of pain she had caused, for the opportunities she stole from Luna, and for the devastation she inflicted on Alexander's heart. She tried to argue, to appeal to memories of loyalty and years of service, but it was useless. Alexander, cold and resolute, allowed no excuses. He no longer saw a dedicated assistant standing before him, he saw the person responsible for robbing his daughter of a dignified childhood, for letting Isabella die without justice, for manipulating him for nearly a decade. At the end of the meeting, Clarissa was escorted out of the building by Alexander's personal security, under the stunned gaze of everyone present. The symbol of power she had upheld for years crumbled in minutes. Her influence, her privileges, her stability, all of it was stripped away for good. Alexander left the room, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders, though the ache in his chest remained. He knew that, even though justice was being served, no punishment would ever be enough to make up for what Luna had endured. But he also knew this was the first step, the first act of restoration. The company moved forward, cleansed of the silent corruption that had lurked within its walls. And Alexander, for the first time, wasn't thinking about numbers or stock prices, he was thinking about how to rebuild what had been destroyed. Clarissa had fallen. Now, all that mattered was looking at Luna, at the little girl who unknowingly carried both the greatest losses and the most beautiful promise of redemption. After the storm came the silence. But it wasn't an empty silence, it was the beginning of something new, something Alexander had never experienced in his life, the challenge of being a father. In the days following Clarissa's downfall, Alexander moved every piece necessary to secure legal custody of Luna. The process was swift, not just because of his powerful name, but due to the complete absence of any other family member who could claim her. Even so, Alexander made sure Helen Foster remained by the child's side, recognizing the essential role this woman had played in protecting her when the whole world turned its back. At first, Luna was wary. It wasn't easy for her to understand that this man, a stranger until now, was claiming to be her father. The luxury of the new home, the enormous bedrooms, the brand new clothes, the toys that filled the closets, none of it could hide the fear still lingering in her eyes. Alexander, however, was determined to do things differently. He didn't just want to rescue Luna from poverty, he wanted to earn the place in her heart that should have been his from the very beginning. And to do that, he decided to start with the simplest thing, being present. Helen was also brought to the mansion, given a comfortable, dignified room, and provided with the best medical care she had ever imagined. Alexander ensured she would never again have to worry about bills, medicine, or food. She was honored not just as a temporary guardian, but as a constant maternal figure in Luna's life. The first days were all about adjusting. Alexander put aside meetings, canceled trips, and left his companies in the hands of his directors while he learned what it meant to live beyond the ruthless pace of business. For the first time, he woke up early, not to read reports, but to prepare breakfast alongside Luna. He walked her to school, picked her up, sat with her to hear about her day, and with every small moment, something inside him began to change. Luna, by little, started to let her walls down. The light in her eyes, once dimmed by scarcity, began to return. She discovered a love for reading, spending hours with Alexander in the mansion's grand library, listening to stories he made a point to read aloud. The man who had always been surrounded by numbers now found himself fascinated by fairy tales, by stories of courage and justice that brought smiles to the daughter he barely knew, but already loved with all his heart. It didn't take long for Luna to call Alexander daddy. The first time it happened spontaneously, during a game in the garden. Alexander froze for a moment, feeling his heart swell with emotion. It was a simple word, yet it carried an enormous meaning. He hadn't been there for the first 7 years of her life, but he was determined to be the best father from then on. Helen watched it all with a full heart. She had always known Luna deserved more than the world had given her, but she never imagined she'd get to see her grow up surrounded by love, by opportunities, by true protection. Alexander made sure to include Helen in every decision regarding Luna's routine, respecting the unbreakable bond the two had formed during hard times. The mansion, once cold and silent, came alive. The sound of Luna's laughter echoed through the halls, filling the home with joy where previously there had only been transactions and meetings. Alexander learned to stop and live, to appreciate the simple moments, to see beauty in the little things. He knew he couldn't erase the past, but he was building a solid present where Luna felt loved, safe, and part of something bigger. Every new day was a chance to create memories, to strengthen bonds, and to finally be the family they were always meant to be. The months turned into a new chapter for everyone. Alexander Whitmore's mansion, once a symbol of power and loneliness, had become a home filled with laughter and genuine moments. Luna blossomed, her once hesitant steps now light and confident. The little girl who once carried the weight of hunger and abandonment on her shoulders was now enjoying the childhood she had always deserved. Alexander had become more than just a father, he was a completely transformed man, rediscovering the beauty of living with purpose beyond business. He didn't just want to give Luna material comfort, Alexander decided she deserved to experience every joy childhood had to offer. On weekends, they explored parks, museums, libraries, always accompanied by Helen, who was recovering with dignity and gratitude. Helen became a constant and respected presence in the mansion, caring for Luna with the same love as always, but now with the peace of no longer worrying about survival. Alexander, in turn, made a point of reminding everyone every day of her importance in their lives, treating her with the respect and affection she had never received before. The most memorable day of this new chapter was their first family outing to Millennium Park, an iconic place in the city filled with art, music, and nature. To Luna, everything was magical: the fountains dancing to the sound of water, the sculptures gleaming under the sun, and the famous silver beam reflecting the city lights, and the smiles of everyone passing by. Alexander walked hand in hand with Luna, holding her tiny hand firmly, with Helen strolling beside them at a calm pace. It was a sunny afternoon with clear skies, a stark contrast to the gray days that had marked Luna's past. Her smile was contagious, and with every laugh, Alexander felt his heart warm. He carried her on his shoulders, played with her on the grass, took pictures, and each moment felt like capturing a piece of happiness he had never imagined experiencing. As they watched children running through the park, Alexander found himself thinking of Isabella Montgomery. The pain of her absence was still there, but now there was a deeper sense of peace. He knew he was honoring her memory by taking care of Luna, by giving his daughter the love Isabella had always wanted her to have. Alexander made a silent promise that he would never let the past repeat itself, that he would protect Luna from any pain, and that he would do everything in his power to ensure she grew up surrounded by love, safety, and opportunities. Helen, with tears in her eyes, allowed herself to live a moment she had never imagined witnessing. She became part of a family that transcended blood ties, a family built on truth, restored love, and new beginnings. Outings became frequent: family meals, games in the garden, bedtime stories told by Alexander. The mansion filled with life, and the loneliness was driven away by Luna's vibrant presence and Helen's unconditional care. Alexander also changed his way of living. He reduced his workload, learned to delegate more, and allowed himself to live beyond spreadsheets and boardrooms. He realized that the true legacy he wanted to leave behind wasn't just numbers and bank accounts, but precious moments spent by his daughter's side, teaching her about the world, about values, about who she truly was. He wanted Luna to grow up proud of her story, even if marked by scars, because now it was also marked by overcoming. The trip to Millennium Park became a symbol of this new life, a milestone of a fresh start. They ended the afternoon sitting on the grass, watching the sunset, laughing together, with Luna resting in Helen's lap while Alexander told stories about his youth. In that moment, everything made sense. There was no more emptiness, no more secrets. There was family, there was love, there was hope. And that would be only the first of many happy memories to come. Life has mysterious ways of teaching us what really matters. Alexander Whitmore learned, in the most unexpected way, that no amount of wealth could ever fill the emptiness of absence, but love had the power to rebuild what was lost. Years had been stolen, memories never made, hugs that had never happened. Yet time, though relentless, offers new opportunities for those who have the courage to start over. Alexander, Helen, and Luna wrote a new chapter together, a story that didn't start perfectly, but found an ending worthy of redemption. Alexander was no longer just the billionaire respected by the world's largest corporations. He had become a present father, a man who traded loneliness for the company of his daughter, who learned to appreciate the simple moments, to laugh without guilt, to cry without shame. He now understood that the true legacy he would leave the world wasn't in figures, but in the positive impact on a life that had once been forgotten. Helen, with her sweet and resilient presence, had finally found a home that offered her dignity. She was honored as part of the family, her importance recognized daily, not just as the woman who cared for Luna during the toughest times, but as someone irreplaceable in the girl's healing and growth. And Luna, once hidden in the shadows of the city, now shone bright. Her laughter filled once silent hallways, Her steady footsteps echoed through the mansion's grand halls, and her once wounded heart now pulsed with hope. She was a daughter, she was loved, she was protected. Every day by Alexander's side was a new adventure, a chance to learn, to grow, to dream without limits. Time moved on, but the bond between the three only grew stronger. Luna excelled in her studies, discovered a talent for painting, inheriting her mother's artistic sensitivity. Alexander supported her every step of the way, present at every recital, every little challenge, showing that nothing would ever be more important than seeing her happy and fulfilled. Helen became Luna's safe harbor whenever Alexander was away, attending to occasional business matters. She was a mentor, a friend, a second mother. In this new life, all roles complemented each other, and there was no more room for abandonment. And you, who stayed with us through this story, reflect, how many lives are out there, forgotten, silenced, just waiting for a chance to be seen? How many children grow up invisible to the world, waiting for the miracle of truth to come? How many hearts are being held back from loving, from building connections, by secrets that should have never been kept? The story of Alexander and Luna is living proof that love can overcome any distance, any lie. Proof that second chances exist for those brave enough to pursue them, to correct mistakes, to face the past with dignity and start over. If there is one lesson to take from this story, it's this: it is never too late to change a life. It is never too late to be present, to listen, to care, to love. Sometimes, the greatest wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we give from the heart. The journey of Alexander, Luna, and Helen was far from perfect, but it was real, marked by resilience, by justice, and above all, by the transforming power of love. You too can be part of this chain. Never underestimate the strength of a truth revealed. Never underestimate the impact of a heart willing to start over. Because in the end, it is love that rescues. It is love that frees. It is love that heals. And maybe, somewhere out there, someone is waiting for exactly that: to be found, to be seen, to be loved. Just like Luna, just like Alexander, just like so many other lives ready to bloom. And you, do you believe in second chances? And before we wrap up, if you've made it this far, it's because this story touched your heart, and here at Enchanting Stories, we have so many more inspiring stories waiting for you. So go ahead and join our growing community. It's super easy. Just click the red button down below and subscribe to the channel. Come be part of our family of hearts that are passionate about soul-warming stories. Oh, and don't forget to hit the like button. When you like the video, YouTube understands that this story deserves to reach more people, and together, we can spread even more hope and emotion around the world. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Who knows, maybe your city will get a special shout out in our next video. That's it. Subscribe, like, comment, and share this video with someone special who also loves uplifting stories and happy endings. Here at Enchanting Stories, every video is a warm hug for the heart. See you in the next story. Until then.